It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on back in to another podcast by George. Took some time off from the podcast, actually. It's been about a week, maybe longer, since we've done one. And that's quite a bit longer than I normally have as far as a break is concerned. But I'm coming back to a topic that we have a lot on the podcast. If I had to do just one, it would probably be this one, and it is the climate emergency. And I always cite this passage from a book that I've had him on before, Lee Camp, Bullet Points and Punchlines. Get this book, but Lee Camp really summed it up well, and this is what Lee wrote. He says, "Climate change is the only thing we should be thinking about. I don't mean there should be a report every couple of hours about climate change by our bloviating bullhorns of mainstream news. I don't mean once a day you should mention to a friend that, Al Gore seems vaguely douchey, but probably has a point. I mean, climate change should be all we're thinking about. It should be a major factor in every conversation, every job, every TV show, every humor column, every tweet, every clever t-shirt slogan, and every fortune cookie message. Climate change should be everything." And I couldn't agree with Lee more. And you see this graphic that I put on my podcast all the time about the big three, the topics that I cover all the time. It's climate, war, and healthcare. And of course, climate is right at the top, because all of these other issues that we're concerned about that dominate the news cycle, they're all gingerbread if we don't get climate handled. And that's what we'll be someday if we don't get to the bottom of this, don't get some solution on the climate crisis. And we're going to be talking about this new UN report that was leaked by Agency France Press. And we're going to bring our expert in right now on the podcast by George live line. It's Dr. Jerald Schnoor. And just by way of introduction, Jerry's the co-director, co-founder of Iowa Environmental Focus, a product of the Center for Global and Regional Environmental Research. It's a nonprofit source for Iowa-specific news, analysis, research, and commentary on the environment, covering a range of topics including air and water quality, climate change, extreme weather, sustainable communities, and green energy. Dr. Schnoor holds his degree, his bachelor's way back in '72 from Iowa State University. And, of course, the University of Texas, Austin is where he got his MS and PhD. He joined the University of Iowa faculty in 1977, where he taught civil and environmental engineering as well as occupational and environmental health. His specific fields of knowledge include water quality, modeling, aquatic chemistry, and climate change. And one of my favorite guests on the show, and of course on a topic that we all need to focus on. Dr. Schnoor, welcome back to a podcast by George.
Well, thanks, George. It's good to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you. Let me see if I can bring this up on screen with any luck. All right, this deals with what we're talking about from the Agency France Press. It's an op-ed piece. This is from Truth Out, and the headline reads, "Terrifying UN Draft Climate Report Urges Total Transformation of Our Way of Life." And I'm going to go down a couple of paragraphs here and read a little bit from this. According to a terrifying, massive, and excruciatingly detailed report by the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, which was obtained by Agency France Press, what is happening out west in the United States is not a meteorological fluke, but a hard look at the immediate future of the planet. Species extinction, more widespread disease, unlivable heat, ecosystem collapse, cities menaced by rising seas, these and other devastating climate impacts are accelerating and bound to become painfully obvious before a child born today turns 30, reports the AFP. I'm going to take that down off the screen. Okay, so there's this alarm that's out. Now, Jerry, this is a kind of a leaked report. It's not supposed to be out until February, so we're a little early here. How significant is this report, and is this accurate in your mind?
Well, of course, I haven't seen it because it was leaked, as you said, George. But this is the main report. This is the go-to source for climate information. It comes out about every 7 or 8 years. First one was, I think, 1990. and it's from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That's a few thousand scientists who contribute to these chapters. The physical science basis of what's going to happen and happening with regards to climate worldwide comes out first, and then the rest of the report involving social and political and economic issues and what to do about it comes out later. And it's designed to be out in spring of 2022, but this apparently this agency got a leaked copy of a draft report.
You know, and it starts off this op-ed piece talking about what's happening in the northwestern United States, the southwestern United States. The Northwest in particular is boiling. And of course, I know climate scientists like you like to caution people when it comes to weather. I mean, because weather and climate aren't exactly the same, and you can't just look at today's weather and extrapolate what's happening with the climate. But when you look at Seattle and Portland and places like that are, you know, well over the 100-degree mark, and they normally ought to be in the 70s, is that, you know, that's once in 1,000 years, I think they're saying. Are these weather anomalies, or are these trends?
Well, of course, today's weather is weather, but the climate is warming for sure, especially in arid areas. We know that dry areas are getting drier, and that's because when there's only a little bit of soil moisture and the atmosphere is warmer, and we know that it is warmer from measurements, then it's going to evaporate more quickly. That means that droughts are going to start sooner, last longer, and be more frequent in arid areas. On the contrary, in wet areas, it tends that because the air is warmer, it holds more water. So like Midwest, Iowa here, we get a lot of our weather, especially at this time of year, from the Gulf of Mexico. And air holds more moisture, and that means we're going to get more. So wet areas are getting wetter in general, and that means more flooding for us. But ironically, our models, even though we run here at the University of Iowa, George, indicate that even that flooding in the Midwest can be punctuated by drought as well.
Let me bring this back up screen here so that we can take another look. Okay, it says, if the data and conclusions in this IPCC report are accurate, what immediately awaits us is staggering. It reads, by far the most comprehensive catalog ever assembled of how climate change is upending our world. The report reads like a 4,000-page indictment of humanity's stewardship of the planet, but the document, designed to influence critical policy decisions, is not scheduled for release until February, as Dr. Schnoor said. It's too late for crunch UN summits this year on climate, biodiversity, and food systems, some scientists say. The challenge it highlights are systemic, woven into the very fabric of daily life. They are also deeply unfair. Those least responsible for global warming will suffer disproportionately, the report makes clear. And it shows that even as we spew record amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, we are undermining the capacity of forests and oceans to absorb them, turning our greatest natural allies in the fight against warming into enemies. Okay, I wanted to talk to you about that specifically because I know you've studied this extensively. These allies that they're talking about that we would normally have, they're being affected the most, and of course the poorest people on the globe are the ones that are going to be hit the hardest, and this is something that I think you've seen coming for some time.
Well, as you say, that seems to be the way it always goes. The poor people don't have the agency, don't have the economic wherewithal to respond and make their infrastructure hardened against these extreme events, and they're suffering. Coastal nations that have, are subject to hurricanes, for example, sub-Saharan Africa, subject to drought, California subject to wildfires, Miami subject to sea level rise. Lake Charles, Louisiana, for heaven's sakes, got hit 3 times last year with major storms, and Hurricane Laura was the biggest damage damages ever recorded in the United States. Not to mention our derecho right here in the Midwest, 700-mile long storm, 100 miles wide, unprecedented, like a number of parallel hurricanes or tornadoes going across the Midwest all at the same time. These are extreme events, and we know that as the atmosphere warms, the oceans are warmer, it's going to occur more frequently.
Well, the media just the past couple of weeks have had a lot of reports on this, more than normal, and I've seen a lot of articles. I want to bring another one up here.
I do worry about my grandkids, George, because as the report says, especially the next couple generations are really going to be feeling this, and people are going to start moving. There's going to be environmental refugees in millions, maybe hundreds of millions.
Well, that's a nice segue, Dr. Schnoor, because that was the next item that I was going to bring up. It's from CNN, and it reads, the incredible pictures of a depleted Lake Mead on the Nevada-Arizona border illustrate the effects of drought brought on by climate change. Later this year, the U.S. government will almost certainly declare the first ever water shortage along the Colorado River. Maps show more than a quarter of the U.S. is in an exceptional drought, underscoring the scope of a decades-long dryout. Now, the thing that they're talking about here is that there are, I think the statistic was 40 million people that could be out of water here. I mean, honest, the numbers here are just staggering. Yeah, here it is. Remember, 40 million people living across 7 western states and Mexico get their water from the Colorado River. And of course, we've seen these photos of Lake Mead and of the Boulder Dam. And so many people, that is literally their water lifeline. And my question for you, I guess, would be, have climate scientists, or is there just no alternative? What happens other than mass migration? I mean, that is the only alternative, isn't it?
Yeah, when parts of the planet become uninhabitable, and I think we're going to observe that in our lifetime, people have to move, and that's probably what is going to happen. On the other hand, if we can do infrastructure to harden ourselves, to make it raise highways and bridges, and in the case of flooding, and change electrical substations so that they're hardened, and like we saw with Texas this winter during the polar vortex, harden our energy infrastructure so that it can withstand these events. That's the other alternative, and hopefully that's what we'll do. But we haven't even leveled off our global emissions yet, as the report says. We had a bit of a dip during the pandemic, but now we're coming right back, and we've got to first level off those greenhouse gas emissions and take them to zero in the next 30 or 40 years, something like that. And if we don't do that, things are going to get much worse. It just continues to get warmer and warmer with stronger and stronger events if we don't do something. So yeah, we should be worried about our kids and our grandkids.
Well, I can't let you go without bringing up a topic that was suggested by my executive producer-in-chief. That would be my wife. She's a big fan of Dr. Schnoor's, and she loves it when he's on the show. And what she wants to hear more about is something that he talks about, which are these efforts at soil restoration. She really believes that on an individual level that a lot of this can be helped along or resolved by trying to do something with the soil, which, of course, is the focus here in the state of Iowa. I mean, that's the breadbasket, folks, that we're talking about. So how important is that, Dr. Schnoor, and is there really any movement in that direction?
There is movement, but just like our move towards solar and wind power, renewable energy, it's not going fast enough. So there's farmers interested in growing cover crops, farmers interested in stopping erosion. We've lost more than half of our soil organic carbon, more than half of our topsoil in Iowa since settlement, let's say since the 1830s. And again, that's unsustainable. You can't go on the way that you're doing. And by putting organic carbon back into soils, by rotating crops again, by stopping wind and water erosion, by keeping the soil covered with some crop all the time, like a cover crop in the winter, we can put organic carbon by decaying roots back into the soil. Where'd that come from? From the atmosphere. So we took the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. That's a good thing. We call that negative carbon emissions, by the way. And we put it into soil. Win, win, win. That's what we got to do. That's just a portion of what we have to do. But your wife is right, and tell her thanks for me. George, I'd like to come back to Lake Mead, though, just for a minute, and mention that it's not, for your listeners, it's not all climate change, as you can imagine. Lake Mead, the dam gates were closed, south of Las Vegas in the 1930s, and now we're at the lowest level since the dam was closed at that time. But and climate change, this prolonged drought that we're having in the West, is a major part of it. But it's really only about maybe a third of the problem, in the sense that we've put the 40 million people, so many more people into the area, and we're doing agriculture, even growing alfalfa, which is a terribly water-hungry crop, where we shouldn't be doing it. And the result is the Colorado River doesn't even flow to the ocean anymore. Mexico, in the end, gets nothing in many years now. So it's intensive agriculture. 400 golf courses in the Phoenix area. 400, come on. It's intensive agriculture. It's how we use the land. It's the people. And yes, it's climate change.
I got to give a shout out to our friends Desharm Jones, the musical duo that I have on the podcast a lot. They wrote a song, The River Runs Dry, and it's exactly about that it runs dry before it gets to Mexico. Well, before I leave you, I want to bring up one more graphic here, and this dovetails very nicely. Again, we got a nice segue here. I wanted to bring this up because government needs to lead the way. We need action on this, and it's agencies, which are the media here. Look at this. Now, this is from the Iowa poll. This is published just this past week or so. Here are the things that we are focusing on in the Iowa legislature. Broadband. Okay, I think everybody wants better broadband. Who gets the money from it is one big issue. But these are the things, the top issues. We're giving stronger legal protection to police officers, cutting income taxes and ending the inheritance tax. That's the Republican-led Iowa legislature. Increasing penalties for protest-related crimes. Taking the first step to amend the Iowa Constitution to add the right to keep and bear arms, which would result in fewer restrictions on guns. Oh my God, I look at this list and you can see it on screen here. I mean, I'm going to leave that up for a second here. You can see the things that we're dealing with here. But Dr. Schnoor is talking about here, we're talking about species extinction. I don't know if we're talking about the human species. That's probably a ways off, yeah. But we're talking about mass migration and people running out of water in the western United States and all of these calamities. And these are the issues that are dominating politics and the news cycle. We've got to come around to, like I started the podcast with, to the fact that this climate issue needs to be on the front burner. That situation, that calamitous circumstance down there in Miami may even be somewhat due to climate. They're talking about how the subsoil or the water levels are, they may find that had something to do with that apartment building collapse down there. And I guess, Dr. Schnoor, my last question here for you would be, in your lifetime, in your experience, I mean, we're old enough to remember John Kennedy and his call to go to the moon. Not old enough to remember World War II, but of course the U.S. government was able to, I don't know how much strong arm they had to use, but they were able to convert the industry might of the United States into a war effort for World War II, and a lot of people credit that with what won the war. Can we, is it a possibility that this gets much worse, that we could convert, or that the government could take a hand in private industry to compel this kind of effort to address the climate change like they did the Nazis, for God's sake, in World War II?
Yes, I think you're right. I think we could. There's still time, and we should let the listeners know there's still time, but we have to act. I'd say within the next 10 years, we really have to transform our economy over to electric vehicles and a smarter grid and renewable power and hardened infrastructure. And yeah, by 2050, we have to be out of the fossil fuel age. It's been a really good run for us. You know, we've powered our transportation and weathered our homes and done our manufacturing all with fossil fuels, but the fossil age is over. And we've got to come to something much better. It's going to be cleaner air, better health, no longer having to pay for non-renewable fuels. It's going to be a much, much better world. But we have to redouble our efforts. And as you showed from the Iowa list of legislation, we ain't there yet. I mean, we've got a long ways to go in this country and other countries as well. So I think the answer is yes, it can be done. There's still time, but not much. We really have to transform ourselves very soon.
Well, we're out of time. That's a great closer. I guess I would say that don't settle for political lip service. Don't settle for a weak-kneed response. Even this UN report. One thing that is really striking about that, if you read down into it, what's been released anywhere or leaked, and thank God for that. You know, Julian Assange is rotting in a London prison right now for leaking information. We need more of this type of release of information. But what it says is the Paris Climate Accords, that marker that they put down for climate for temperature increase, we're going to blow by that. It's not even maybe twice as bad as what they thought. I mean, this will scare the bejabbers out of you, this thing. Now, again, it's not even supposed to be released until February. Maybe it'll be modified before then. But, I mean, take a look at the article, some of that press that's out there. And we got to leave it there. We got to end this particular episode. But, Dr. Schnoor, I'm going to give you a last word here. Just give us a little closer here as we end this PVG.
I'd close on a note that we can do this. It's going to be a better world, but it means transforming our economy and, first of all, transforming our legislatures and people's mind that this is the way to go. And we can do it.
That's right. I demand it of these politicians. Withhold your vote if they don't. Withhold your money if they don't. I mean, put this on the front burner, front and center, folks. And joining us on the podcast by George Liveline today, Dr. Jerald Schnoor. Dr. Schnoor, thanks again for coming on the PVG.
Thanks, George.
Folks, that's going to wrap it up. That's going to do it. I appreciate you watching Podcast by George. I should have mentioned at the onset, now, if you like this and you're watching on YouTube, like it and also subscribe. And on Facebook, just like us and follow us there. And if you're listening on iTunes, you're probably already subscribed. Any place, really, where podcasts are seen or heard. But that's going to do it for this episode. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.